Hello, everyone. I just want to welcome you and say happy International Day before International Women's Day and happy Women's History Month. And I'm really, so thrilled to see all of you here. I am Jenny McPhee, the Academic Director of Continuing Education at the Center for Publishing and Applied Liberal Arts at the School of Professional Studies. And I have the great honor of being the co-chair of the Women's Leadership Forum with Karen Jackson Weaver, Senior Associate Vice President of Global Faculty Engagement and Innovation Advancement, who unfortunately cannot be here with us today, but is certainly here in spirit. So we are thrilled to bring you the Women's Leadership Forum's Spring Book Talk featuring Cara Alaimo, the author of Over the Influence, Why Social Media is Toxic for Women and Girls and How We Can Take It Back. She will be in conversation with Erica Viegas. So let me quickly sketch out for you how the next couple of hours will unfold. After some initial remarks and acknowledgments, I will introduce Erica Viegas, who will introduce Cara Alaimo. They will talk for about half an hour, and then we'll have a Q&A, and after which we'll have about a 10-minute break so you can network with your neighbors. And then we'll discuss a prompt given to us by Cara at our tables, and then we will report out from each table, so please select somebody to do the reporting out, about our reflections on our conversation. Cara has then kindly agreed to sign your books, and she'll be signing them at that far table right over there. So I would like to begin today's event by acknowledging that NYU, both in New York City and as a global institution, is located on unceded lands and was founded upon the exclusions and erasures of Indigenous peoples globally and of the historically marginalized communities, those who are known and unknown to us. At NYU, we continue to address these legacies as we work to both recognize and dismantle systemic exclusions. Please join me in 5 seconds of silence in gratitude and recognition of those who have come before us and laid the groundwork, and also for current and future generations who continue to pave the way for us to be here today. We are appreciative and respectful of these foundations. In further acknowledgement, Karen and I would like to thank the Women's Leadership Forum Steering Committee, Lisa Coleman, Gigi Dopico, Tracy Gardner, Bethany Godzo, Dee Simmons, Jendai, Jin Montclair, Karen Narcissian, and Grace Kostrojov-Protos. Their great contributions, advice, and leadership are fundamental to the success of the WLF. To remind you of our mission, the WLF fosters leadership development, facilitates professional growth, and sponsors opportunities for outreach for women currently in leadership roles at NYU, as well as those who aspire to leadership roles within the university. The WLF is an initiative supported by the President's Office. We extend our deep appreciation and thanks to President Linda Mills for her continued enthusiasm for our mission. We would also like to thank Dr. Autumn Rain, the Deputy Chief of Staff of the Office of Global Inclusion, Diversity, and Strategic Innovation, who works very closely and tirelessly with us on all of our initiatives. And I would also like to give gratitude to the amazing OGI team for all their hard work and their great spirit. Would you stand up, please, OGI team? There they are, yay, and they're outside too. This event would not have happened without Dean Kamath of the School of Professional Studies, who has the energy of a comet, generates ideas faster than ChatGPT can answer a prompt, and is a phenomenal connector. It was she who connected us to Cara Alaimo, a former faculty member of SPS. We are honored to be joined today by April Thompson, representing the Women of Color Leadership Network. We would like to say a special thank you to April, the Director of Graduate Recruitment and Engagement, and Tamara Santiago, Senior Associate Director of Engagement, for their leadership excellence and ongoing collaboration as partners of the WLF. April, will you please join me here on stage?
Thank you so much, Jenny. I will be very brief because I'm very excited to hear this talk. But as Jenny mentioned, my name is April Thompson. I'm the Director of Graduate Recruitment and Engagement inside Global Enrollment Management and Student Success. We recently had a name change, so I'm trying to remember all the words. And Tamara, Dr. Jackson Weaver, and a colleague, Jenny Curry, who's no longer with NYU, we founded the Women of Color Leadership Network a few years ago. And I just want to take a moment to have everybody sort of look to their left, look to their right, make eye contact, say, I'm going to talk to you afterwards, because that's exactly how the Women of Color Leadership Network was founded. We started going to events. We've noticed that we kept seeing the same people. We were in the same circles. And one of us, probably Dr. Karen, who was brave and said, hey, I've seen your face before. I want to get to know you. And reached out and started that relationship and brought the four of us together. And we saw that there was a need, there was a gap in the types of programming that we wanted, that we needed for ourselves. And that's how the Women of Color Leadership Network was founded. So I encourage you to network. It's Women's History Month. International Women's Day is tomorrow. So women and non-women in the room, get to know each other, network, and maybe start something special. Thank you.
Thank you, April. We would also like to acknowledge the enthusiasm and participation of the NYU Women's Initiative. The NYU Women's Initiative is one of our longest-running alumni identity networks, with over 7,000 alumni from all 21 schools and institutes. They work collaboratively across the university to build curated programming. I believe the president of the NYU Women's Initiative is here, Judy Balkin. Hi, Judy, would you stand up and just let everybody see you? So if anybody would like to be more involved with the NYU Women's Initiative, please come and talk to Judy. And also I wanted to thank Sarah Balog of the University Development and Alumni Relations, who's also here and was very helpful from the beginning of planning this event. So now finally to get to our program. Would you, Kara and Erica, come on up? Just have a seat. I'm going to introduce Erica, and then Erica will introduce Kara. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce you to Erica Viegas, who was actually Kara's student in her NYU course, Global Relations and Intercultural Communications, in 2015. With over 20 years of experience in fundraising and communications, Erica has left an indelible mark on the organizations and causes she has championed. From her present role at the World Economic Forum, where she builds strategic partnerships for the young global leaders and the global shapers community, to her instrumental contributions in launching a new 501c3 and International Endowment Fund for Youth, Erica's dedication to creating meaningful change knows no bounds. Throughout her illustrious career, Erica has positioned multi-million-dollar campaigns for success, contributed thought leadership pieces to national newspapers, and written speeches for esteemed figures such as university presidents and global icons, President Bill Clinton, Bill Gates, Sir Richard Branson, and more. Erica herself is a dynamic public speaker as well as a singer-songwriter, and she has used her platform to inspire and uplift audiences around the world. Her commitment to social impact is evident in everything she does. Please join me in welcoming Erica back to NYU.
Thank you so much, Jenny. What a thrill to be here, and even more of a thrill to be able to introduce Kara Alaimo, who has launched her new book, Over the Influence, this week, right before International Women's Day tomorrow. So a little bit about Kara. She has had a remarkable career. I'll give you a few highlights. She is currently the associate professor at Farley Dickinson University, where she created an academic program around social media. Since 2016, she's contributed to CNN Opinion on women and girls in social media. She was appointed by President Obama as spokesperson of Treasury during his administration, and was also the head of communications for the United Nations Secretary General under the development goals. So that's just a little taste of it. Of course, the thing that I love most about being here and being able to present Kara is that she was a professor at NYU. She was my thesis advisor while I was here. So it's a very full circle moment to be able to talk about her book today.
Thank you so much, Erica, and thanks to everyone at NYU for putting this on. I started here as an undergraduate studying journalism, and Erica and I were both saying when we were NYU students, we never thought we'd be in these seats today. So we're so thrilled to be here, and thank you to Erica.
Of course, so maybe to start us off, this book is harrowing, but you offer a lot of solutions, and maybe just talk us through the motivation for writing it and maybe some of the process.
Sure. So my book, Over the Influence, is about how social media is affecting every single aspect of the lives of women, girls, and non-binary people, from the teen years to online dating, to how we parent our kids, to our careers. And I took a walk with my CNN editor recently and had a big laugh over the fact that I was originally motivated to write this book in order to help figure out how I was going to handle my own daughter's use of social media. And we, of course, now realize how terribly naive that was, because after writing this book, I realized that my biggest problem isn't how I'm going to help my daughters use TikTok. It's that my daughters have to live in the world that social networks have wrought. My piece that I've written for CNN that's coming out for International Women's Day tomorrow argues that, what I argue in this book, which is that what's happening on social media is making the offline world so much more dangerous for women and girls. And so when people tell you things like, if social media is so toxic, just don't use it, that's not a solution at all, right? We have to fix what's wrong with social networks. And so I'm really on a mission with this book. I'm talking to more audiences than I can count, to therapists, to kids in schools, at bookstores, really all over the country, to try to talk about what we can do as users and what we need to demand from lawmakers and tech companies.
Wonderful. Well, you start the book talking about how the average age of social media users is around 12.6 when they start, and that our decision-making centers of our brain don't actually fully form until around 25. So when you think about a teenager, a few people already came up to you and said, my daughter cares so much about what she looks like, how she's, how people perceive her. What is responsible social media usage at that age? Should they be using social media at all? And how can we empower young girls to start using it responsibly?
So if your kids are already on social media and they're young, I don't want to frighten you. We've got solutions for how you can help them with that too. But if it's not too late, one thing I would suggest is talking to the parents of your kids' friends when your kids are very young, and collectively agreeing that you're not going to let your kids use social media until a particular age. A New York Times reporter recently tried to pin me down on when I was going to let my daughters get phones and use social media, and I told her 16, which of course is laughably old. I might as well have said 40, and she threatened to put it on her calendar so she could follow up with me. But one thing I will say is that research out of the UK tells us that social media use can be particularly damaging when kids are going through puberty, which is between the ages of 11 and 13. Research shows that when girls use social apps at that age, it's associated with lower life satisfaction a year later. And so, I've heard from some parents on my book tour who say things like, does it really make a difference? Like, I know my daughter's getting a phone. Do I really have to fight this battle to not give it to her every day for the next year until she turns 14? And I tell them, sorry, but yes, you do. I did an interview with one podcaster who told me that she offered her daughter $1,600 cash if she would not use social media until she was 16 years old, and her daughter took the money. Now, obviously, you have to be in a position of great privilege to be able to do that, but I just want to say that I don't think we should be above creative thoughts here.
All right. I'll have to think about that one. So one of the things that struck me the most in the book was the chapter around bullying and how it's just constant right now, particularly the sharing of images. Fake nudes is something you talk about. Sexting is something you talk about, and how the majority of young people are actually doing this. And a lot of young women don't realize that they have a choice in terms of consent or in terms of being able to say no. So as the mom of 2 young boys, I'm thinking a lot about what do we need to start talking about, both with young girls and young men, around consent and autonomy of their own bodies.
So this is one of those things that shocks me because I just didn't grow up in the current youth era. But for kids, for tweens, for teenagers, sexting is normal. It is extremely commonplace. And I know it, for me, it's already in my head, but my daughter wouldn't possibly do that, right? But unfortunately, the statistics tell us the majority of parents who think that will be wrong, the vast majority, in fact, because it's just a common part of youth culture. I do think that this is one place where we have to put our feet down and educate our kids of all genders about why they can't do this. Part of it is because they could be prosecuted for producing and disseminating child pornography of themselves. But we also know that when nude images of a girl or a woman end up on the internet, it puts her at greater risk of sexual assault, it puts her at greater risk of depression, it puts her at greater risk of suicide, it makes it harder for her to get a job, it makes it harder for her to date. It can be absolutely life-destroying. And a girl could send one image to someone she really trusts, say her boyfriend, maybe that image will be hacked on her phone or on his phone. Or maybe they will break up, and so-called revenge porn. I disagree with the term because many of the people this is happening to haven't done anything wrong, and these images were never intended to be pornography, but so-called revenge porn, where people get intimate images and then post them all over the internet later on, is a very real and common occurrence. The other one is sextortion. So, teen girls I interviewed for my book told me, well, yeah, if like an older guy wants to follow me on Instagram, I'll be flattered. I'll accept that request without really registering the danger. So a young girl, or any of us, a woman, establishes an emotional relationship with someone she meets online. He convinces her to share one racy image. And the next message back says, Venmo me $25,000 in the next hour, or this is going all over social media. So I think sexting is just, and sharing intimate images is just something we have to talk to our kids about and just explain why it could destroy their lives. I have tried to start these conversations early. I was telling Erica, I asked my daughter who's in preschool, what would you do if someone asked you to do something and it made you uncomfortable? And she looked at me like I had asked her the most obvious question in the world. She was like, I would say no. But the question is, will she say that, right, when she's 12, when she's 13? So it's just sort of these constant reminders to our daughters and really, I think, to everyone in our lives, to adults as well, about these very real dangers.
Well, speaking of constant reminders, I think, we look at social media. I don't think anyone in this room has, I don't raise a show of hands. Does anyone think they have a healthy relationship with social media as it is at your age?
There you go.
No age does, right? And particularly when we look at influencers, I think we all have this perception that influencers are living this completely glamorous life. They're out on yachts, they're raking in the dough. You say that's not true, and in fact, influencers are often exploited. The average income of an influencer is around $10,000 a year.
For a woman.
Particularly women of color and non-binary individuals are getting exploited even more. So my question is there a way to follow strategically to uplift those that we would like to uplift?
Yeah, it's such an important question. So first of all, one of the big things I try to do in this book, in my chapter called Digital Housewives, is to debunk what it's really like to be an influencer. The vast majority of influencers are women, and the vast majority don't make anywhere near the federal poverty level. A lot of these influencers are women who, we all know, need flexible jobs because they're trying to balance their caregiving responsibilities and make some money. I think that a couple of decades ago, these women would have been freelance writers, but now all the advertising money that used to go to magazines and newspapers is increasingly going to Facebook and Google, right? So they can't make decent money writing an article for a women's magazine anymore. So instead, they're trying to influence. And their lives are pretty much the opposite of glamorous. These women feel enormous pressure to project perfect lives, pristine homes, well-behaved children, because if they don't, they feel that they won't be able to attract brand sponsorships, that brands won't pay them to create content, because as I say in my book, who wants to buy products so that you can look like, women with misbehaved kids and messy homes, right? And so they feel enormous pressure to keep up this facade, and it takes an enormous toll on their mental health. And things are particularly bad for, say, women of color. I interviewed one woman who's a Black running influencer, and she told me she has the same follower counts and posts the same kinds of content as other influencers who she sees working for this one brand that she wants to work with. She's repeatedly applied to work and always been rejected, and she thinks a big part of it is she doesn't have this stereotypical body of what people think of when they think of a running influencer. I interviewed another influencer who is now non-binary, and when they came out as non-binary, they lost about 40% of their work with brands because they could no longer authentically represent a makeup brand or a brand that produces razors for women. And so it's particularly tough for those influencers. And so I think the thing for us on the other side of this to remember is that we shouldn't be sucked into this content, looking at the content produced by influencers and saying, why doesn't my life look like that? At my launch event on Tuesday night, there were a ton of therapists in the audience, and they were all saying, like, we have to find a way to debunk this for our clients because it leaves their clients feeling less than. Their clients are all sitting down on the couch and saying, I tried to capture this image of my baby on the beach, and it turns out my baby hates sand, and and they couldn't get a picture, and it was my goal for the day, whatever it is. So we have to consciously not let ourselves feel less than and realize that these bodies and these lifestyles we're seeing online are heavily filtered and curated. But then, to answer your question finally, I think it's on us to be very mindful of who we do follow. And it is very much the case that a follow is like a vote in our society right now. It determines who has power and influence in our society. One thing that we've seen is that when women use social media to try to advance our careers and raise our profiles, we often end up with fewer followers, fewer reposts, and fewer resulting opportunities like speaking engagements than the men in our fields. And I think this comes down to a very deeply rooted bias in our society that people turn to men for expertise. And so a big thing I call on us all to do in this book is to radically rethink how we use social networks, to follow diverse women, to share their expertise, to amplify it, to post about issues that affect our lives. And I think we could change a lot for ourselves and for other women if we did that.
Is there anything you would suggest in terms of bolstering our own careers through these platforms?
Yeah, I think it's so important to post about our work and to connect with other women. And it amazes me, when I've put out this book, women I don't know, a very influential feminist, Kate Mann, is on a bus right now, traveling all day from Ithaca, New York, to speak with me at the Strand this evening about my book. But the women who I've connected with on social media who are just doing an incredible job of spreading the word about my book. And so I think, social media is a place where we can connect with other people in our fields. And the thing to do is to follow and amplify the posts of other women in our fields, and they'll follow you back. You'll become internet friends. And that's how a partnership could start, or your next opportunity should come along. To try to kickstart this, I even created a list of feminists to follow, and I put it on my website, which is just my name, Alaimo.com. And they're just a very diverse group of women doing incredible things in all sorts of fields. They're just the tip of the iceberg, but I suggest starting to follow these women because it will naturally connect you with just a group of really incredible women all over the country and the world.
So speaking of that network of women, I'd like to touch on motherhood for a second and parenthood. I think in becoming a new mother, it can be the most joyous time, also in some ways the most isolating time. And when you're doing that 2 a.m. feeding or you're trying to figure out information, our phone is right there. And so new parents particularly are looking to the internet for answers, for solutions, and for community. Is there a way to use the internet not to follow sanctimommies, which you talk about in the book, or people who have children without messy lives, but to really develop a community of strength and information?
So I think it's tricky because, as you said, we're so isolated and so looking for so many different kinds of information as moms to help us. I suggest not using social media for medical information, right? If you need to figure out how to ask your kid to, how to get your kid to fall asleep, here's a radical idea. Talk to your pediatrician. I think that there are supportive content creators, and for those who do want to follow them, I also put a list of content creators to follow on my website. My husband's a physician, and he sort of crowdsourced this with physicians all over the country of these incredible moms who are OBs and other providers who offer really fabulous information. But the thing about it is, I did an interview on a podcast with a therapist recently, and she was telling me how many of her clients will look at, you guys all know Dr. Becky, or other influencers who share parenting content online, and the advice seems so brilliant, and then come to her feeling like failures because they can't implement it, right? And that's where, of course, it's hard to implement things in the context of a very complicated life, right? So a lot of these influencers make the solution sound so simple, and then we feel like gotta be something wrong with me, right? Because I can't get my kid to behave now that I've watched this 20-second clip on Instagram. And so the way that I have found a supportive community as a mom is more in closed groups where I share about my kids with friends and family who love them and are watching them grow up. And I think that that's really positive for them. But I tend to seek out my information offline, mostly from medical and scientific experts.
Wonderful. Well, you talk in the book about sort of the dark side of some of these closed groups online, particularly around white supremacy and homophobia, but also male supremacy. And I think you have a piece coming out pretty soon around how we can stop online violence from spreading into real life. And I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, so the extremist misogyny that we see on social media started out in these closed groups, and they were dark corners of the web. They were communities on Reddit. It was the manosphere. It was places where very angry men found one another to complain about women. and share their hatred and grievances with us. And what we've seen over the last, I would say, 6 years or so is that misogyny has now spilled over onto mainstream social networks. And so it's just sort of a common part of youth culture on TikTok right now, where there'll be these jokes about violently attacking women, and they're considered hilarious. And I was talking to this expert who studies them in London, and she pointed out that, this is really unique compared to other forms of extremism in the sense that, 16-year-old boys or grown men aren't typically thinking it's hilarious to joke about beheading people on TikTok, right? But somehow this misogyny has become part of our culture. And what I think it's doing is it's normalizing violence against women, but also abuse of women, deprivation of our rights and resources offline. And I think we can see this in so many sort of different indicators. The CDC released its Youth Risk Behavior Survey last year, which found that over the previous 10 years, there'd been a huge increase in the number of teen girls who said they'd been forced to have sex. If we look at things like the repeal of Roe versus Wade, and by the way, when I try writing this, it's so interesting to see the difference between the reactions of male and female editors when I make this claim. But, we've talked about a gazillion things that can help explain the overthrow of Roe versus Wade. We've talked about, a conservative effort that was underway for decades. But the thing that I think hasn't been part of the public conversation is why the High Court thought that it was politically and socially feasible to take away this legal protection from women. And I think the part of the reason could be the misogyny that has become normalized in our culture. And so that's where I think we have to fix social networks. And I talk about how we can do it. Obviously, tech companies have to take this misogyny off their platforms. Most mainstream platforms claim in their community standards that they disallow misogyny. But if you talk to women who are victims of it, they say that when they report it, social networks just often don't take it down, don't respond, or respond and tell the woman that rape threat did not violate the community standards. And so I think it's important for all of us to file these reports en masse because if we all did more of it, I think it would send a powerful signal to social networks that this is not okay with us and that we don't want to see this kind of content on their platforms. I also suggest talking to people offline about this content. And so the feminist activist Loretta Ross has this term, calling people in, for a respectful offline conversation and saying, I saw what you posted. I'm concerned about it. I want to have this conversation with you. The reason why it's not such a great idea to reply on social networks is because engagement sends a trigger to algorithms that people like content and want to see more of it, when of course the opposite is the case in those situations. And then I think we have to counter it with sharing information about issues that affect our lives. And just sort of radically rethinking what we share on social networks as well.
Well, I think the argument would be, well, this is freedom of speech. So I'd love you to address that because that's probably what people would say. Well, I'm allowed to say anything. I have freedom of speech.
So I have a chapter on this in the book. It's called The Flounce. Is anyone familiar with the term? So you'll find the term in Urban Dictionary, but it goes back to the Victorian era, and it's this idea of a woman gathering up her petticoats and storming out of the room. And so now when women who experience hate leave social networks, it's called the flounce. And of course, the implication is that we are emotional and overwrought for fleeing things like rape threats on social media. But it is absolutely the case that when women are targeted with hate, allowing these men to continue to post it and claiming that they have free speech, what that really does is silence the victims. And I have so many accounts in this book of women who flee social media when they're targeted. And so I think it's just important to make no mistake that promoting free speech has the effect of silencing victims.
So maybe one final question. Speaking of quitting social media, we know that a lot of these companies kind of have a bit of a bro culture going on. Women are not promoted, women are not given the chance to even speak about wage discrepancies without retaliation. So the actual cultures within these organizations that are not supporting women are unlikely to support them online. Is the solution to just quit social media? How do we take it back?
So I don't think the solution is to quit social media, because it's a place where we can empower ourselves. It's a place where I'm promoting my book. It's a place where we can connect with people and find job opportunities. And so I really get upset when people tell women just leave if it's so toxic. I think the solution is to radically change what social networks look like. Part of it is making demands to tech companies to get hate off their platforms. Another big one would be to signal to people when images have been manipulated. Because I think if women and girls had that constant reminder that all these images of people's bodies that they're seeing aren't real, it would really help reduce the mental health effects of all of this exposure to very curated, filtered content. And then, we as users have to counter it. We have to radically change who we follow, what we share, and what we do when we witness sexism and misogyny online, to create social networks that are places that empower ourselves and other women.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Kara, for sharing that.
Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much for that incredibly scary but very interesting conversation. So I'm sure we have lots of questions from the audience. We have a couple of people with microphones. So could we get a microphone over here at this table on the right? Yeah. And would you say your name and where you are?
Yes, I'm Mary Park. I'm from the music business program. And on the 22nd, it's my daughter's 12th birthday, and I promised she could have social media. I'm fully willing to renege. So do you think 12 is too early?
Oh gosh, I hope I don't get in trouble with your daughter. I think 13 is a better idea if you can do it. But let me give you some tips for what to do, since this is happening imminently, regardless of whether you hold off a year. First of all, talk to your daughter about why we shouldn't judge anyone, but in particular ourselves, for our appearances. Because when girls join these visually oriented platforms like Instagram, they're going to be bombarded with pictures of the Instagram body, which can usually only be achieved through surgery. I think it's really important to talk to your daughter about the dangers that she could face online. So professional sextortionists or other male predators who might approach her online. And then a really huge thing is to make sure she knows that if she gets into trouble online, she can come to you no matter what, and you won't take away her phone. I interviewed an attorney in Brooklyn who handles a lot of cases of cyber exploitation. And she told me a situation that she sees pretty frequently, unfortunately, is where a girl is, say, being sextorted for more and more racy content, but is afraid to tell her mom because she's afraid that her mom will take her phone away. So establishing that open dialogue is really important. And then just finally, another thing is that, the thing I saw in my research is that social media can be a very toxic place for girls. So one of the stories I tell in my book is of a woman named Vivian who says that she got her eating disorder as a teenager on Instagram. But I also talk about how social media can be a lifeline for kids who are minorities in their physical communities but go online and find their people. Or your daughter might develop an interest that turns into a career online, or develop an interest in working on important social justice movements and get involved in them on social media. So much of it is about how our kids use social networks. And I think because of that, you should sit down with her and search for content together about her interests. And the really great thing, if you do that, is that will send a signal to the algorithm that your daughter's interested in it. So even when you're not scrolling with her, she will be seeing more of that kind of content. And just while you're scrolling, one other piece of advice that I got from Kate Mann's book, Unshrinking, which was published in January, is she talked about how she would open Instagram with her young daughter and look at pictures of people's bodies, people of all races and sizes and levels of ability. And what she would say to her daughter is that she was so happy that these people are in the world with us. And I thought that was such a beautiful way of teaching a child not to judge people for their appearances. And so that might be something else to try, and I'm sure you'll do a great job.
Thank you so much.
Oh, shall I go first? Or go? Okay. Hi, I'm Wendy Lee. I teach in the English department. Thank you so much for this book and for this conversation. I have a 12.6-year-old daughter, and I have seen the dark side. But my concern is actually, and what brought me here, I'm so angry about the thing you said at the beginning, which is that we all have to live in this world created by these dudes who care not and think not about women and girls' lives or health. And that just is what we live in. And I'm wondering what your sense is about legislative pressure or regulating pressure from within those companies, because yes, we can do things as individuals or parents, but these are insane structures that have changed the world, changed human personalities, as you said, changed offline interactions, and that change will have to come, I think, from those companies and those structures.
Yeah, so I mentioned I went for a walk with my CNN editor recently, and I told her, I've been writing on all this congressional testimony, right? All of these revelations for you since 2016, and how many laws have passed to fix this problem? And the answer is exactly 0. And so I could give you a long list, but if I had to name 2 that would be my priority right now, today, it would be about so-called revenge porn and deep fakes. So I talked about how when nude images of a woman or girl end up online, it is so life-destroying. So the SHIELD Act would criminalize non-consensual sharing of nude images. So that would be kind of like the revenge porn. And then the Defiance Act would allow victims to sue perpetrators of things like nude deepfakes. So if you're not following this, deepfakes are fake images that people create using artificial intelligence. The tools to do this are now widely available and cheap or free. And as you can imagine, the majority of images that are created, the majority of deepfakes are pornographic. And this is something that I think is a huge threat to our daughters. Last week, the news broke that it was actually middle schoolers at a school in Beverly Hills who had created nude deepfakes of their classmates. Before that, I was following the story in Westfield, New Jersey, which is near where I live, where it was high school boys created nude deepfakes of their female classmates. And this is, as I said, it's life-destroying. And so part of it is I'd like to see this bill passed pretty immediately. I'd also like to see legislation passed that would require images and video generated by AI to be watermarked, but also criminalize the removal of those watermarks. Right now, President Biden has secured voluntary commitments from major tech companies to watermark this content, but it can be so easily removed. So that's sort of top of list for me right now. And then we get into what we do about these algorithms. One of the other biggest dangers in my mind is how easy it is for people to fall down rabbit holes of toxic content. So the Center for Countering Digital Hate did a study recently where they pretended to be a 13-year-old girl on TikTok and searched for content about body image and mental health. Within minutes, this girl was being promoted suicide content, tummy tuck surgery, weight loss drinks. And it's so easy to fall down these rabbit holes. There was another study done last month in the UK that opened accounts, basically pretending to be a young boy in the UK, searching for content that young boys typically search for. Within 5 minutes of searching for these common terms about things like fitness and body image and masculinity that boys in the UK say they search on, the amount of misogyny that was suggested on TikTok's For You page quadrupled in 5 days. So this is really scary, but we get into tricky and complicated legal territory about how you fix it, other than preventing kids from being online. So it's tricky. I don't have all the answers there.
Mic check. There we go. Hi, I'm Lauren Pepin. I'm an alum of NYU. And this has me thinking about something I've been talking to my sister and my sister-in-law with, because I have 2 nieces. And it's kind of where this all starts with the great screen debate. One of my sister-in-law, one of them says no screens. The kids are a lot younger. And the other one has given the girl a phone ever since she was like 18 months, like a screen, just constantly watching. And I definitely see the effects for sure. She's gonna be 7 and cannot eat a meal without having a phone with like YouTube going and the ads and like just that like constant need. And I just think like what your thoughts are on just screens when they're younger, because does that play into obviously needing to have social media? Because soon she's 7. I mean, she's like bombarded with these images and needs it. Like we can't even take it away. And like I would never comment on what to do. It's not my child, but like we still like how do you like get them off of it a little bit? Like what do you do? Because it's just not going to get better. It's probably only going to get worse.
Yeah, so Erica and I are both moms of young kids, and so one thing I would say is I do have a lot of sympathy for this mother, because we live in a society that makes it so hard. Eric and I were talking about how our kids are constantly sick and home from school, and I was recording podcast interviews about my book a couple weeks ago, and what did I do? There's only one way to keep kids quiet that's fail-safe, and that is letting them watch a screen, right? So you can get your work done. And I think about, this is a mom, if the girl is 7, who probably went through the pandemic, I don't know if she was working from home, but, had a child out of school for a long period of time. And so, a big part of the solution is structural supports that are probably not coming anytime soon in our society, right? Congress is cutting funding for childcare, not investing in it. But it's very easy for me to understand how this would happen, which is a mom needs to survive, and this stuff is highly addictive, right? And so the American Medical Association has guidance, it's the American Pediatric Association has guidance on like what they recommend, and like as kids start using screens, it could be a good idea to watch things together and talk about it. I'm not a physician, so I would definitely have a conversation with a pediatrician about, if the kid is glued to the phone, right, how you would start to kind of wean them off of it. And I imagine it will be really painful. But I also think the more that parents can talk about the content a kid is consuming and have those conversations and try to make it more educational content. I mean, I can tell you the way that I clean up after dinner is my daughters have a computer program, ABC Mouse, and I actually think they're learning a lot, and it's very addictive, but it's better than YouTube, right? And so there are some smart solutions. I would talk to a pediatrician, maybe a therapist, right, about what's healthiest for this individual child based on the family's circumstances, because I think it's, what works for one family is so different from what works for another family in the context of their lives.
Yeah.
Hi. There we go. Joanne Tombrakis. I teach. One of the things I teach is social media and the brand. I'm hearing an echo back. So to tag on to what she was saying before, one of the things that prevents the social networks from doing anything has been Section 230, which prevents them from being held liable for any of this terrible stuff that they're doing. Do you think there's any hope that that's ever going to go away? I dream about it, but I don't know if it's ever going to go away.
So there are exemptions to Section 230. There are a couple of them, and one of them is in the case of copyrighted material. And so what you'll see is that if someone posts a clip of copyrighted material, social networks are actually quite quick to take it down because otherwise they could be sued for keeping it up. So I wrote a piece for CNN years ago now when Donald Trump was in office. And in the same week, he had tweeted out a Nickelback clip and posted threatening a civil war. And which post do you think Twitter took down? The Nickelback clip, because that was copyrighted. And so just the thing that I would say is that, you'll hear a lot of arguments, especially from tech companies, about how complex it is to police content. But in fact, when content is copyrighted, it turns out not to be so complex for them to take it down pretty quickly. And so I think this is a direct quote from my book. I say, it's simple. Our laws are designed to protect Warner Brothers, not women.
Good line.
And so I reject the idea. I actually call this mansplaining, this idea that tech companies have convinced us that the way algorithms work is so impossibly complex, we couldn't possibly understand. And I say, actually, there's something we could make very simple for them, which is the idea that they're responsible for what their products do, just like in every other industry. And so when you ask if there's any hope, I don't know if you're asking, is there political hope?
I don't think there's any. I don't think that's going to happen. But I was just curious because you're in that space all the time, and I do think my corporate career was in media. We were held responsible if we did anything that was not kosher, so to speak.
Exactly.
They're not. They call themselves tech companies, but they're not. They're media companies now. You can make the argument everyone's a tech company, for that matter, and that's really what holds them from being, held liable for any of this stuff that they're doing. And your book is specifically on young women, which I know is a terrible thing, but it's toxic for all of us on a lot of different degrees.
Yeah, and the book looks at every aspect of our lives, including women as well and non-binary people. But yes, it's toxic for all of us. I see little political will to take the kind of action that would hold these platforms accountable for more content. But I guess one thing I'd like to demystify is this argument that it just can't be done, right? That there's so much content on social media that it can't be done. I think, as I say in the book, I think it's classic mansplaining.
No, my line is if they can figure out a way to follow a pair of shoes all over the internet, they can figure this out.
Exactly.
Yes, hi, I'm Steph. I'm a biology alumni at GSAS. I'm a biochemist and I work part-time as a STEM instructor. I'm just wondering, is there any way that the companies, this button? Oh. Is there any way that something can be done where these videos of the various rappers and music people, there's a lot of sex going on, hardly any clothes on, just inhibit the showing of these videos between the hours of 8 and 7, because it is a distraction in the classroom. They don't want to take notes. It's hard for them to concentrate to read. It is a big problem. And the other issue is that a lot of girls, they see the women in the various performing a lot of different activities, sexual activities. And then a lot of the young women, middle school up to high school, we're gonna go be sex workers, only they don't say sex workers. And they're imitating the dancers. This is an emotional, cultural issue that is having a negative effect. The girls see this as a career, rather than going on and getting some really decent career, science, math, social work. So what can they do to be responsible to inhibit the highly sexual content of these videos being shown really between 8 and 6 or 7? Because these hours it's supposed to be doing the homework, but they're watching videos. Myself, the instructors, adjuncts, we have to deal with this in the classroom. It is a problem, and with the reading comprehension, math comprehension, so they had the computer people, they have different things to follow various issues in war from satellites. So I think it could be done, but I haven't seen anybody say anything about it. What do you know that they could do something to inhibit these videos with a lot of sexual and aberrant activity content? Thank you.
So I think the big problem that girls face is that when they join social media, it's designed to, give you a dopamine hit with likes and affirmation. And they quickly realize that one of the easiest ways to rack up likes is by making themselves look hot for pictures. And so that's why we have girls sexualizing themselves at shockingly young ages. And so some of the change needs to come from our society, right? And, I don't know, you're asking about these sexualized videos that are online at the same time that kids should be doing their homework, right? Yeah, I agree with you that this is a huge problem. There was a study that was done a couple of months ago now that said something like, the average kid is getting 200 some odd notifications a day on their phone. And one thing we do know is that, about the way our brains work is that you don't do your best work when you're constantly interrupted. And so I think, as with everything, it's really good to have an open dialogue with kids about what your rules are going to be and what the exceptions are to them. But I think it's a good idea, for instance, to do something like make social media a reward for kids after they finish their homework. Again, that won't always work because sometimes they may say they need the internet in order to do research for their homework. But maybe it's, being logged out of their apps and things like that. I do, one thing that I worry about and see as a professor myself is just like the reading comprehension, the ability to concentrate. I mean, there's been all sorts of studies documenting this. I think are decreasing, and I think it is because of all the interruptions. And so I think giving your kids some social media free space is just really important, and it probably does fall on parents. I also just think, having healthy extracurricular activities naturally reduces the amount of time a kid could possibly be on social media. And so I think it's good to have a dialogue about when you put your phones away at the dinner table, when you're doing homework, and then what the exceptions are, whether it's, we're waiting for news from, a sick family member, so we're going to keep our phones on at the table. Or my husband works a lot of nights, and often I have my phone on the dinner table because we FaceTime with him while my daughters and I are having dinner. There's no blanket solution that will work for every family and in the context of every life. But I think thinking about these things and laying the groundwork and laying down rules with kids is a really good idea to try to address these problems that you're talking about.
What about school sexual education? Should social media be part of that? Where does that play into this conversation?
Yeah, so if our kids were growing up in Finland, they would be taught from the time they learn to read and write how content affects their emotions, how to identify fake news, and there's just none of that happening. I teach social media, and almost every undergraduate who has walked through the door of my classroom tells me that this is the first education they have ever received. A high school social studies teacher might have said, "Don't believe everything you read on the internet," and that's it. And so the education needs to be broad and deep about how people prey on you, how they manipulate you, the dangers online, how to spot fake news, how to protect yourself, how to empower yourself, how to take care of your mental health, and it's not there. And part of that, of course, is sex education, as I write in my book. And so part of the problem is parents who don't want their kids to receive this education in schools. And I think that's really unfortunate because we know, again, a lot of parents think, but not my child. Statistics tell us otherwise. Kids of all genders learn about sex from pornography that they watch online. And so for them to be able to have an education about why what they're seeing isn't realistic and why it's problematic that the vast majority of porn online depicts violence against women would be a very healthy thing. And when kids receive this education, they're better able to protect themselves. They understand things about consent. They understand the risks they're up against. And so this education just needs to be taught in schools. I interviewed an incredible educator who was literally run out of a school for teaching sex ed that was widely considered to be in line with national and international standards. So part of the big problem is parents, but part of it is just the utter lack of education in our country. I think some of it is that in the climate that we live in, individualized teachers are afraid to veer off the script, right? Because they'll then become lightning rods for criticism. And so what we need are laws mandating that all kids get these educations. The other big thing we know is that kids in affluent areas are far more likely to learn about these things than kids in poorer areas, and that's just totally unacceptable. So again, another reason why we need legislation mandating that kids get curricula on all of this.
Hi. Oh, okay. I feel like there's been a lot of questions about kids, and so our brains aren't fully developed until we're 25, right? And I kind of wanted to shift focus to college age students. My little sister just turned 18. She's applying to colleges. And so I wanted to know what advice, what strategies would you give college age students when it comes to social media when they're moving to a new state, a new town where they have a very little support system?
Yeah, I think social media can be helpful for keeping up with people, but a big thing is to not let social media stand in for offline relationships. So Vivian, this woman I talked to for my book, talked about how she didn't really learn how to make friends offline in college because she was on Instagram. And on social media, it's easy to feel like I have 2,000 friends or 2,000 followers, whatever it is. The psychologist Marisa Franco talks about how right now we're living in what she calls a friendship famine, where it's more common to be isolated than to be connected in the United States right now, and that is devastating. So studies show that friendships are more important for our health than diet and exercise. And you don't need to have a lot of them. You need to have a couple close friends who you can talk to. And so I think there's this danger that you go off to college and you're keeping up with your friends from high school or whatever it is. You need some close friendships. They could potentially be cultivated through Facebook Messenger and phone calls, but that's really important. I think the body image stuff continues to be very relevant in college, so just reminding yourself that people are posting the filtered versions of their bodies and lives is really important. And I think, reminding yourself that employers are going to be searching you online, so being mindful of what you post. And starting to use social media in college to develop connections that, could potentially turn into job opportunities is really important. And then having plenty of time where you're not on Instagram, you're joining the clubs at school and you're getting involved in offline activities because we know that face-to-face contact is what we need in order to be healthy.
April Thompson, Global Enrollment Management. I'm so excited to read the book. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
My question was actually really similar, but I guess maybe to look at it from a different lens. This is a safe space. We're all friends here. Yes. I was caught up in the recent viral TikTok story, Who the Expletive Did I Marry?, which has been all over social media. They were on Good Morning America. But it brings up or highlights this overshare on social media that I am noticing a lot of my friends, and even now that my family members, my mom, my grandmother, using social media, and even my peers and my friends, like I said, this thought of oversharing, and how do we talk to our loved ones and our friends without trying to be condescending or, we're not their parents. We can't tell them what to do. But I think this other piece of I'm going to share my story on social media and not really thinking through the consequences of all of that.
That is such a great question. I haven't been asked it yet. I love it. So I'll tell you that influencers who I interviewed, women influencers, told me that they felt pressured to overshare, right? So this is an expectation of women in particular who influence this idea that you will post pictures of the interior of your bedroom and you will bury your thoughts to the world because that's how your followers feel like they get to know you and feel like they're friends with you. And that's what keeps people glued to you and consuming your content. And so a lot of these influencers didn't quite like it, right? But felt that they had to do this again to maintain their follower counts, to maintain their sponsors. When I think about women who are not professional influencers who are oversharing on social media, and I see it frequently in myself as well, some of it I wonder if it's a reflection of what influencers do, right? That's spilling over. And I also think just a lot of it is women who need support. And, even for those of us who ostensibly have a lot of support, as a mom, my life is frenetic. I rarely get to sit down and have a coffee with a friend, right? And so it can be tempting when you're going through a difficult situation. You can post about that late at night when you can't really get together with someone in person. And it can be tempting to use it as a source of support, because if you post something, probably people are going to respond and send you like virtual hugs and say they've got you and offer you advice. And that's something we need, and we often don't have the space to carve it out in our offline lives, which is very unfortunate. But I do think we should try to do the carving out in our offline lives. We had a huge health scare with one of my daughters last year, and it was tempting for me to post about it because I would have gotten so much support, and I was so worried and upset about it. But ultimately, I cared about my daughter's privacy more, right? And so I just think, like, thinking about how you can find that support offline is a really great idea. And of course, normalizing it for other people. So, you see a friend overshare something. What about just picking up the phone and saying, hey, do you need to have a coffee? Like, do you need to talk, right? She probably needs some advice, is stressed or confused or uncertain about something. Why not give her some offline support if you can?
Hi, my name is Jean Giordano. I am from the College of Dentistry, Communications. I am also the mother of 4 daughters between the ages of 20 and 30. I also used to work in media and was in social media in the early days, I dare say, but in 2010-ish or whenever. Okay. I have a lot to say. And I want to comment on so many people who some things that have been mentioned, but I also want to challenge you on one thing, very importantly. And, well, I think importantly, sorry, but I want to challenge the notion of not being on social media, what you are saying. Because, so number one, other than the fact that I have communications in my title, my job title, I am all but off of social media, and all of my friends know this. And I'm trying to gather people to join me. I am on a one-woman crusade, okay? Because how do we hurt tech companies? We hurt them by hitting them in the pocketbook, okay? We are all the product, people. So when you're talking about your aunts or grandmother or whomever oversharing, we're all falling prey to something. I read a lot about this. There are studies, nobody feels better actually after going on Instagram, nobody. So I challenge what you said about finding somebody and getting the virtual hug. BS, I'm calling BS on that. You don't, it's the joke, thoughts and prayers. You post something on social, you post the obituary of a relative or whatever, right? If you want to know you want your people to know that you had a loss in the family, and you get thoughts and prayers. It's a joke. That's a joke. The hearts are fake, right? Your friends are going to be there for you. The guy that you went to high school with 40 years ago or whatever, his heart, it really doesn't mean that much. He's going like this. He's past it. He gave you a heart. He's past it. So I'm sorry. I really do have a lot to say about this. But I also wonder, the idea of the Million Mom March or the Million Mother March kind of a thing, which was, I just looked it up because I'm like, when was the Million Mother March? And what was it? It was about gun control. Wow, we've done great with that, right? But this is technology and social media in particular. It's a tool. And it is a tool that we have not adapted to. Well, we haven't adapted to technology, period. But we have not adapted to using it properly. There is so much work to be done. And so is abstinence the best way? I don't know. But let me just say one thing, because it's also part of the selfie generation. For so many years, right, for I dare say thousands of years, basically every world religion taught us, preached humility. Is there a lot wrong with organized religions? Fine, you can say what you will. But every world religion preached humility, and then all of a sudden, right, this comes along. And even when you talk about what it's doing to our children, I mean, this is real. The reason I said I have 4 daughters between 20 and 30, an almost 31-year-old, my almost 31-year-old, marked difference, because she didn't have it at a particular age. Jump down to my 27-year-old, my 25-year-old, my 20-year-old, marked difference. I'm telling you, I think we need a Million Mom March. I will, anybody who wants to abstain with me.
I completely love that idea. I think that is fantastic. So just in the interest of time, did you have a question you wanted to ask, or to Kara?
I want to hear what you have to say about my challenge. The challenge that I said about abstaining from social media, because it is a way that we can. It is the idea of like a Million Mom March or going rogue. I don't buy into the do it, jump on.
So Kara, what do you say to that?
I think there's a lot of validity, and I want to acknowledge that for some or many women, not using social media can be a great choice, right? As I was walking in the door, this woman wants me to speak at her school next year, and I messaged her back on Instagram. We've had this whole exchange, and I said, please email me, because as soon as I'm done promoting my book, I'm not going to be checking my Instagram messages, right? It's exhausting. It's deflating. And so I agree with you that some women may want to say, I'm not using social media in my life, and that's a great decision in the context of her life. What I don't accept is people telling women, all right, if social media is toxic, just stop using it. Because as I've said, it's also a tool for empowering ourselves, and because what's happening online is spilling over offline and hurting us. So I think we have to get our arms around these problems. I believe it was Jo Piazza. I just did her podcast last week, and I think maybe a year or two ago, she was advocating for a Women's Day off social media. Just one day to send a message. And I don't think it ever happened. I guess it just sort of didn't gain traction, but maybe you can make it happen, and I'll join you. You can sign me up, I'll be first.
So, yeah. The amazing thing, thank you so much. This has just been an incredible conversation. And I have so many things that I've taken away from this conversation and want to further discuss. But that's the whole sort of real inspiration here today, is that we don't talk enough to each other and about this subject, because there's addiction and shame, and you're always failing by trying to figure out how to get off or how to control or how to do that. So it makes you more and more isolated. So my huge takeaway from today is we need to talk about this. All the time, and to each other. At the very beginning, you were saying, talk to other parents and see what they're doing. Talk to them and get sort of aligned with your friends, your daughter's friends' parents, about what the rules are, just in your little, your own little, community. It's just really important to be vocal. So that's just huge. Thank you so much for getting this conversation going. And we're going to continue it now at our tables. We'll have a little bit of a break, go and get food and do, if you need to go to the restrooms and so on. And then we're going to come back and we're just going to stay at our tables. And I have Kara has provided us with a prompt. And the prompt is, what are 3 things we can do to help make social networks healthier places? Now, I know you won't answer that at all. You'll be like, get off it. But, let's crowdsource, let's talk, let's network with each other on this subject and anything at all. And then please choose somebody at your table who will report back out what your 3 things are. Let's keep the conversation going, and we'll do that in about 15 minutes, and then Kara's going to sign your books. Thank you. Now, can we have a round of applause for Kara and Erica? Thank you. Hello, everybody. I hope you have had really great conversations at your table. In the interest of time, this has been such a great conversation. Time has gotten a little bit away from us. So, and I'd like Kara to be able to sign the books and everything else, so I'm not going to go table to table, but for you all to report out. But if you do want to volunteer to report out, we'd love to hear what you have to say, and we have the microphone ready. So, any volunteers for some three takeaways from your conversation? Great, thank you.
Hi, my name is Ekta. I'm a current student. I'm pursuing MS in Integrated Marketing. Not sure about three, but we can start with the first one. And I'm just going to add to what she already said. Use social media as a place to amplify your voice. You feel very strongly about it, and it's easier to gravitate to people who align with that voice. So use it as a platform to do that. And at the same time, like she said, build on your work, promote yourself, create a brand out of yourself. And I think that's how social media should be utilized. So that's our first point, while we're still thinking about the two others.
That's excellent. It's so true. And we just do have power when we collaborate and communicate. And so definitely on these issues, that is how we should approach this.
I just also wanted to say, as an older and a parent of a 21-year-old NYU student, and I'm an alumni as well, social media, it's also a place to build strong relationships, positive one, because it has been for me, offsite and offline, you could do that. So use it as a positive thing. I know that's a broader term, but I have this thing. I do have influencers, but my influencers have all died, like Albert Einstein, Soren Kierkegaard. So I do have influencers that influence my life all the time, but they're not even here, and they might not even know that they are my influencers.
It is extremely important to recognize, yes, thank you for that we have power over these technologies, actually, and that we can curate who we follow, how we communicate on these platforms, and we have to feel empowered to do that, and then feel even more empowered to get what we want from them. So, yeah, very good point. Any other? Yes.
So I actually have a really good example that happened just 2 days ago. And my one thing that we can do to make it better is to just be really authentic, and also just always remember that you never know who's watching. Because I was in a class with somebody, and we never really interacted. She seemed really standoffish, and I didn't realize she was following me on my social media. And I always try and put out like positive and inspiring things. And on a whim, she reached out to me and asked for a coffee. And I went out to coffee with her. I was like, of course. And she said that she had been following, I'm in the real estate business, brokerage, and she'd been asking all these men for advice and what to do, and she was scared. And then she came to me, and she said that she was like so inspired with what I had put out, and that I was like a role model. And I was like sitting there like shell-shocked. I couldn't even believe it. And she said that like just having coffee and hearing like really from me, like was like the push that she needed, and she was gonna go get her license, and she was gonna do this. And she was just so scared because all these other men who she had asked for advice were kind of like trying to take advantage of her, were they trying to like she didn't feel comfortable. And so you just like never know who's watching. And I was like, oh, I just thought that she didn't, really like me. She was always standoffish. And she's like, oh, I was following everything that you do. It's so exciting. It's so glamorous. But I like gave her the real lowdown. And I just had no idea. And now we're like gonna like have weekly check-ins, and like I kind of feel like a little bit like imposter syndrome, but like it was really nice, and just you never know.
Another one we have to deal with.
Yeah, that's another one. But it was like so inspiring, and I thought about it the whole night. And she probably has no idea that the whole night I went home and I was like, I can't believe that this one girl who I just had no idea was following me and excited and felt really inspired just from what I said.
That's such a fabulous example, and it makes me think about communication, right? These platforms and everything else are supposedly all about communication, but they can be extremely isolated and make us actually not communicate. And that's such a great example. Communicate offline and online, but make sure you're, keeping, and we have such power when we actually do get together. So it's a great example. Any other feedback or shout-outs? Yeah, please.
So we were trying to think of if there are any social networks that are helmed by women. And so maybe an idea is to support or start our own female-led social network.
What a great idea. Why hasn't that happened?
We were talking about Goodreads is a good place for women to be social, but then I think it was sold by Amazon, so it's not great anymore.
Yeah,
so
I remember that. Yeah,
starting our own.
Yeah, great. That is a great idea.
Anyone want to?
So, any others? Okay, well, fantastic. And thank you all for coming. Really fabulous conversation got going here. Please continue it. And again, a big thank you for Kara and Erica. And she will sign books at the table there in the corner, so please take your books to her. And we'll see you at the next Women's Leadership event. Thank you.